Hello, and welcome to the Cyborg Anthropology Podcast. I'm Maraya Karena, and here we look at the ways that technology, nature, and people come together to form whole ecologies of what is. And what I want to talk to you about in this episode is YouTube, because I fucking love YouTube, and I am fully convinced that YouTube is where it's at. And I have a lot of ideas about why. So one of my great heroes, Terence McKenna, he has this idea that the entire history of the evolution of life on this planet is a history of increased mobility. So you start off with cells, or let's start off with cells, with single-celled organisms that can't really do very much except for rub up against each other. You go from cells, they start interconnecting and stacking into plants, growing in ways that they're able to pattern out into space. But they're fixed, right? They have their roots in the ground in a certain place. So you go from plants to animals, and all of a sudden, your roots come up. You're able to move around, exploring the spatial dimension. And from animals, you get humans. And here, something really interesting happens, where all of a sudden we have a consciousness that's able to explore the dimension of time, or a dimension of time. We have memory, we have afterthought, and we have forethought, ideas about the future. And then humans start doing something really interesting. We start creating technologies that allow us to construct representations, that allow us to create information that all of a sudden is able to be passed down generation to generation. So things like alphabets are invented. Even chant could be considered a technology, a way of creating a format that we can remember, that can be passed down through time. You also have things like paint, like sculpture, where all of a sudden you can carve out a deity and put all of the information that that deity represents into a symbolic form. And that representation that you make of that deity and everything that it symbolizes and means for you stays long after your lifetime. All of a sudden you have the printing press. Things like text and still visual images are able to be reproduced at greater and greater speeds, are able to travel the world. Jesuit missionaries bringing, printing press copies of the Bible to China. Images circulating the world, cultures weaving together into a single planet at faster and faster rates. And then computers. And all of a sudden, this information is able to be digitized. And when computers first came out, that's what they were capable of spreading. First text, and then images. And then the rise of video, of audiovisual material. And if you think about it, the medium of video, of audiovisual, contains much more information than text or still image could communicate alone. You can see my face. You can see my facial gestures. You can see my expression. And in a strange way, that's actually hearkening back to these more indigenous ways of storytelling, of sharing information. And there's this guy named Chris Anderson who runs TED Talks, TED.com. And TED is one of my favorite organizations of all time, precisely because of the way that they continuously develop and evolve their organizational structure to allow for information to have greater mobility. They do things like TEDx, where if your speakers are at a certain caliber, at a certain level of prestige, you can have a TEDx anywhere. They'll lend you your name and give you their credibility. So you can have TEDx San Francisco, TEDx Boise. You can even have TEDx Burning Man, which they just did for the first time last year. They also open it up to have people translate their talks into languages from all over the world. They've started conversations on Facebook, asking questions about what would local economies actually look like. And all of these things open up information for greater interactivity. And I think that this is the direction that we're going, is to ever greater levels of mobility. And that right now that is being facilitated, right now that is happening through our technological and social, our techno-social structures. And this guy, Chris Anderson, he has a TED Talk about YouTube called Crowd Accelerated Innovation. And man, I'll put a link to this talk in the notes, but I'm also going to recap it here because I think he really got it, which is probably why TED is so visionary in their organization, because he really got it. Now, a lot of people are looking at the increase in population, and it really freaks them out. They say we're going to have these masses of people, and how are we going to keep everybody alive? And, you know, there's all of those doomsday scenarios about there just being too many people for the planet. And what Chris Anderson says is, he says, but if we look at what's going on in YouTube, we actually have the opportunity as humans to not just be blind, obedient masses, but to be extraordinary. That YouTube, that the spread of audiovisual medium allows for us to be superhuman in a way that is special to this particular time. And he thinks that it's like this for a lot of reasons. The first is that all of a sudden, all of these different activities that people do that would be really, really hard or super clumsy to communicate with just text or still images can be seen. If you unicycle, if you dance, if you do scientific experiments and you can film that and show it, all of a sudden the spectrum of what people do opens infinitely to anything. To anything that people do can be communicated through video. So not only are all of these different skills that people have suddenly visible and hearable and transmutable, but it means that it's no longer grounded just to one particular place. So the best of the best are suddenly put in conversation with each other. The best dancers from Tokyo, Japan, Singapore, Malaysia are suddenly competing with each other, learning from each other in this way that pushes, that challenges every one of them individually to develop further. Because YouTube is a place where there's no protection. You know, if you're good, people are going to say, damn, you're good, and they're going to share your video. And if you're not good, then no one's going to pay attention, or they're even going to have negative comments. So it's this self-regulating system where the best of the best get to see each other and push each other ever further on the edge. The way that I think of this is that they're epicycles of creative innovation. And because the lapse of hearing about something, the lapse between seeing something and working to reproduce it yourself is shortening tremendously. It means that this epicycle of creative innovation is happening ever faster. You know, the other thing that this does is it means that all disciplines are in a process of radical transformation. And this isn't just art. This isn't just performance. This is anything that you could be involved in. Education, economics, philosophy, poetry, because of this same epicycle of information as a feedback loop coming back to us, driving innovation, challenging us to be creative in all areas. It means that everything that you could be into is experiencing a renaissance, is experiencing a time of massive breaking open, development, growth, innovation, creativity. And to me, what I take from this is that all of a sudden, everybody is an artist. If you're a teacher, if you're a nurse, if you're a massage therapist, if you're a singer, it doesn't matter what you're doing anymore. You are an artist because the amount of creativity that you are bringing is at that level. And the reason why you're bringing that level of creativity to it is because information is a feedback loop, driving innovation, telling you, one, what the field already looks like, two, what innovators are already doing, and three, letting those stew inside you with your own experience, allowing you to birth new, novel, creative ideas into whatever it is that you're passionate about. The other thing that this makes me think is that it means that everybody is a teacher, that through that process of going through your own journey of what you care about, of what should be innovative, of experiencing your own creative moments, that you then have something to give back and share in whatever field you're interested in. Business development, construction, dance. It really, at this point, doesn't matter what you're into. It just matters that you're into something. There's this guy named Walter Benjamin, and he's a postmodern theorist, and he came up with this article called Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. And it's actually like a super down and out article. So a lot of these postmodern theorists get, real like, oh, the state of things these days, it's all going to hell in a handbasket. But his idea is interesting. And, I think with all these postmodern theorists, they're really onto something. And his idea was that before, when people would produce art, it would be particular to a place, a time, and a culture. So the materials would be of that landscape. And whatever art they made would be infused with meaning that came directly from that culture. Now, this is why a lot of times art that was being created was altarpieces. Or, something that I like to think about a lot is how it would have felt to be alive in a time when you would go to a concert, maybe Mozart, and you heard a piece of music, and that might be the only time that you or anybody you were with was ever going to hear that piece of music, and how that experience would change your relationship to it. And now, in the age of mechanical reproduction, it's almost like music loses its value, right? Because it can just be produced, it can be pirated, no one even cares about CDs anymore, nobody wants your mixtape, because they can just go listen to it. It's all available, it's all easy. The same with a painting, like Starry Night, like how much does Starry Night actually mean about the Dutch Republic and Van Gogh and that particular time, if there are just postcards all over the place, if you can just look it up online, if it's removed from its cultural context. Walter Benjamin says, what has meaning anymore? And I think that was true up to a certain point. I think that that we have been going through a painful process of infusing our culture with technology, of becoming individuals separated from a cultural fabric. And that we can see this in our art, where maybe there's a certain directionless quality, or maybe we see art that's taking symbols from a lot of different cultures, but those symbols are meaningless. Maybe you're doing Indian aesthetics, but it has nothing to do with the rich cultural tradition and deep mythological significance that's part of Indian understanding or Indian cosmology. And I think that what's happening now is that we're actually coming to the singularity of that idea, where it's almost like through our ability to reproduce at the level that we can, the only thing that has any value is that which cannot be reproduced, right? So I was thinking about this when 3D printing first came out. It seemed like the closest we're getting to having a replicator, on this planet. So if you can make like a pair of shoes, if you can make a notebook, if you can make a liver with a 3D printer, then what has value anymore? And it seems to me like the only thing that would have value is that which cannot be reproduced, which is that first creative moment. So after Van Gogh created Starry Night, that was that moment of his experience expressing itself through that painting. And then they can reproduce it infinitely. They can fractal it out in whatever medium they choose to reproduce it. But that first moment, something magical happened. And I think that that is what has value in the age of mechanical reproduction. So, to me, what's interesting about this is one that people are being inspired and truly pushed to have those moments of creativity in whatever their life path is. You know, even if you're working in an office building or if you choose to be a performer, you are being pushed to have more and more of those creative moments, maybe even more than ever before in human history. And the other thing that I think is interesting about this is that these creative moments of expression, of production, are happening at the level of the individual. So whereas Walter Benjamin was lamenting that culture had lost its meaning, that art that was being produced was no longer emerging directly from a closed cultural context, now culture is you. Now, culture is the individual. It's whatever you are bringing together inside of yourself that then gives rise to your creative production. So, culture is you. And you have this opportunity to produce something that's meaningful for you, that's representative of your cosmology, of the way that you see the world. And what's so exciting to me about YouTube is that now, whatever form that takes, literally, whatever form that takes, you can express it and you can share it. So yeah, shine your star and work your shit out and wild out and do your thing and share it, because the more that you share it, the more it pushes us all forward, the more it evolves us all and drives the innovation that is this tremendous evolutionary moment.